Veer Bal Divas, The Children Who Defied, an empire written by Dr. Jaiji Bansal, a historical reflection on Veer Bal Divas that examines how betrayal, imprisonment, and forced conversion culminated in the judicial killing of two young boys, laying bare the governing logic of Islamic tyranny. On December 26, 2025, Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America, VHBA, observed Veer Bal Divas to commemorate the extreme sacrifice of the two younger sons of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, Sahibzada Zorawar Singh, aged about 9, and Sahibzada Fateh Singh, barely 7 years old. This remembrance was not merely ceremonial. It was a direct acknowledgement of a historical crime rooted in Islamic tyranny. The judicial killing of two children for refusing religious conversion stands as one of the clearest indictments of an imperial order that fused theology with power and enforced obedience through deception, coercion, and terror. The narrative that follows situates Veer Bal Divas within this larger civilizational context, tracing the martyrdom of the young Sahibzadas not as an isolated atrocity, but as the logical outcome of an Islamic regime that criminalized conscience and sought to extinguish dissent by annihilating it at its most vulnerable point. Historical background: by the early 18th century, Anandpur had become far more than a fortified settlement. Under Guru Gobind Singh Ji, it stood as a living assertion of Sikh spiritual and moral sovereignty. The formation of the Khalsa in 1699 had reshaped the Sikh community into a disciplined order bound by faith, courage, and refusal to submit to religious coercion. This transformation deeply unsettled Mughal authority and alarmed the surrounding hill chiefs, who viewed the Guru's growing influence as a political and civilizational threat. On May 3, 1704, Mughal forces, joined by allied hill Rajas, laid siege to Anandpur Sahib. The numerical imbalance was overwhelming, exceeding 100:1 by some accounts. What followed was not a short military engagement, but a prolonged blockade that lasted more than 7 months. Supplies were cut off completely. Food dwindled to leaves and tree bark. Starvation, disease, and exhaustion spread among civilians, including women, children, and the elderly. The siege was not designed merely to defeat the Sikhs militarily, but to break them psychologically and force submission without granting the dignity of open battle. Repeated messages arrived from Wazir Khan, the Mughal imperial authority overseeing the region, offering safe passage if Guru Gobind Singh Ji agreed to vacate Anandpur. These assurances were reinforced with solemn oaths sworn on the Quran and guarantees from the allied hill chiefs. Fully aware of Islamic duplicity, the Guru tested their sincerity by sending bullock carts filled with worthless items out of the fort. The carts were immediately looted, laying bare the emptiness of the promises and confirming that the so-called guarantees of safety were instruments of deceit rather than good faith. Yet pressure mounted from within the besieged city. Many followers, exhausted by hunger and suffering, pleaded with the Guru to accept the offer. Even his mother, Mata Gujri, urged him to consider the safety of civilians. Reluctantly, to prevent further loss of life, the Guru agreed to leave. Evacuation and betrayal. The evacuation of Anandpur Sahib took place on the night of December 21, 1704, under heavy rain and harsh winter winds. Groups of Sikhs, along with members of the Guru's family, moved out first, while the Guru planned to follow with the remaining warriors. Almost immediately, the sworn oaths were violated as Mughal and allied hill forces launched a coordinated attack on the retreating Sikhs. What followed descended into chaos. Darkness, cold, and panic engulfed the column as fighting erupted. The confrontation spilled toward the Sirsa River, usually a shallow stream, but now swollen into a raging torrent by heavy rainfall in the hills. Sikhs attempting to cross were struck down, drowned, or swept away by the current. Horses and riders disappeared beneath the water. In the confusion, Guru Gobind Singh Ji crossed the river with his two elder sons and a shrinking band of warriors. His mother, Mata Gujri, and his two youngest sons, Zorawar Singh and Fateh Singh, were left behind. Exhausted, soaked, and unable to travel further. They were separated from the Guru's protection at the most vulnerable moment. In this condition, Mata Gujri accepted shelter from Gangu, a former servant of the Guru's household, who took them to his village near Marinda. What appeared as refuge soon turned into betrayal. Fearing Mughal pursuit and tempted by the gold Mata Gujri carried, Gangu informed the local Mughal officials of their presence, leading to the arrest of Mata Gujri and the two children and their transfer under guard to Sirhind, the headquarters of Wazir Khan. Cold as an instrument of submission upon arrival in Sirhind, the captives were confined in the Fanda Burj, literally the cold tower, a structure deliberately unsuited for winter confinement and fully exposed to wind and cold. In the bitter December weather, it provided neither warmth nor shelter. This deprivation was not incidental but methodical, imposed to weaken the body and erode the will in advance of coercion. Wazir Khan, enraged by the escape of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, directed punitive retaliation against the Guru's youngest sons. They were not treated as minors under custody, but as instruments of reprisal. The intent was explicit, to punish defiance by proxy and to extinguish the future of the Khalsa through calculated harm to its most vulnerable representatives. During the imprisonment at Sirhind, the Mughal administration extended its repression to the criminalization of basic human aid. Moti Ram Mehra, an employee in the governor's kitchen, supplied warm milk to the two children despite explicit prohibitions. Upon discovery, Wazir Khan ordered the arrest of Moti Ram along with his mother, wife, and young son. All were executed by crushing in a kolu, an oil press selected for its deterrent effect. The episode illustrates that, under Mughal rule, even minimal assistance to Sikh prisoners was treated as a punishable offense equivalent to defiance of state authority. Refusal to convert and judicial execution on December 24, 1704, the two young boys were brought before Wazir Khan's court in a public assembly. Court officials declared that their father, their elder brothers, and the Sikh forces had been annihilated, presenting this as a settled fact rather than a claim. The children were then offered wealth, security, and comfort on the condition that they convert to Islam. The offer was refused without hesitation. The children responded with clarity rather than defiance, invoking the example of their grandfather, Guru Tegh Bahadur, who had chosen martyrdom over religious conversion. Their refusal left little room for further pretense. The sentence that followed was deliberate in both method and intent. The children were ordered to be sealed alive within a wall of bricks. As the structure was raised around them, the young boys remained steadfast, reciting prayers and continuing to refuse conversion. When the temporary wall collapsed before completion, the authorities proceeded to carry out the execution by direct order. On December 26, 1704, the two young boys were executed for refusing to abandon their faith. Their bodies were discarded without rites. Upon seeing them, Mata Gujri, already weakened by cold, hunger, and prolonged imprisonment, collapsed and died shortly thereafter. The most expensive land purchase in history, a wealthy banker, Todar Mal, took responsibility for performing the last rites. Denied land for cremation, he purchased a plot by laying gold coins edge to edge as payment. This act of dignity later brought ruin upon his family at the hands of Wazir Khan, forcing them into exile and obscurity. Today, the site of execution is commemorated as Gurdwara Fateh Gud Sahib, and the cremation site as Gurdwara Jodi Sarab. Each year, Sikhs gather there to remember not only the martyrdom of two children, but also the moral choices of all who stood, suffered, or refused to submit. What history reveals about Islamic rule of the Saka Sirhind should not be treated as an isolated historical atrocity, but as a case study that exposes the governing logic of Islamic rule. When stripped of narrative detail and viewed structurally, the episode reveals a set of recurring principles that shaped Islamic behavior across regions and periods, informing how power was exercised, dissent was managed, and belief was enforced. Al-Taqiyya as Quran-sanctioned deception. Islamic governance has historically relied on Al-Taqiyya, a religious doctrine permitting deception when it advances religious or strategic objectives. Under this principle, false assurances, broken oaths, and deliberate misrepresentation were treated as legitimate instruments of rule rather than moral violations. Primacy of religious conversion. Conversion was not incidental to Islamic imperial expansion, but central to its ideological mandate. Political submission without religious surrender was regarded as incomplete, rendering non-Muslim subjects perpetually suspect until belief itself was brought under control. Brutality as a governance tool. Extreme violence functioned as a deliberate tool of statecraft, employed to terrorize populations, deter resistance, and enforce obedience. Punishment was exemplary rather than proportional, designed to communicate power through fear rather than justice. Lack of moral restraint based on age or vulnerability. Islamic regimes historically recognized no protective boundary for children, women, or non-combatants when religious non-submission was at stake. Vulnerability did not confer immunity. Ideological threat overrode humanitarian restraint. Transfer of punishment beyond the individual. Punishment routinely extended beyond the accused to family members and broader social networks, embedding collective liability into governance. This diffusion of guilt ensured compliance through pervasive fear, binding entire communities to the consequences of individual defiance. These principles are not relics of a distant past. They remain structurally embedded within Islamic political theology and continue to manifest in adapted forms across contemporary Islamist regimes and movements. The mechanisms may vary with time and circumstance, but the underlying logic, deception in service of faith, coercion in service of conversion, and violence in service of obedience, remains substantially unchanged from what was witnessed at Sirhind more than 3 centuries ago. Closing reflections, the events at Sirhind endure not merely as a record of suffering, but as a demand for historical clarity. It exposes what occurs when religious absolutism is fused with political power and dissent is redefined as heresy. The martyrdom of the Sahibzadas was not an accident of a violent age. It was the foreseeable outcome of a system that privileged conversion over coexistence, obedience over conscience, and terror over moral restraint. Their sacrifice stands as a civilizational warning about the costs borne by societies that normalize deception, collective punishment, and violence in the name of faith. 3 centuries later, the structural logic revealed at Sirhind has not disappeared. It persists, adapted to modern contexts, in regimes and movements that continue to justify coercion as piety and brutality as governance. History's relevance lies precisely in this continuity. To remember Sirhind is not only to honor courage, but to recognize enduring patterns, resist amnesia, and refuse the comfort of believing that such systems belong safely to the past.